welcome to the Scriptures Are Real podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about elements of the Scriptures that are very real to us so that we can draw power into our lives from them. I'm your host, Kerry Mielstein, and this is another shortcast to help us go through this storyline that's really the storyline of David at this point. That's what we're doing this week, and we'll, at the very end, hit a little bit about Solomon. So let's jump in where we left off in the last one. In the last shortcast, we were talking about how Saul had died and now David is being anointed king, but he's initially only anointed king over all of Judah. So he's in Hebron. Hebron is the place where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are buried. It's a very significant site for all of Israel as a result, but it's also very firmly in the territory of Judah. Judah is the southernmost tribe, and it's south in Judah. This is definitely Judah territory, and that's where Judah will anoint David king. As I said, he's been anointed by Samuel to be king of all Israel, but not accepted by all of Israel yet. So David is going to go to Hebron, and he's anointed king. He'll be king there for 7 years, and it's 7 years and 6 months that he's king only over Judah and not over all of Israel. And then he's said to reign for 40 years over Israel. So David, he has a couple things going on here. One, this contest is somewhat between David and Ishbosheth, the son of Saul. Now, Ishbosheth is not his real name, I'm guessing. And it's hard to know what to do with names. So, for example, David, David, or Dawid, it means beloved. And David is known as being the beloved of the Lord. So is that a name that became his throne name? It wasn't his original birth name. I don't know. That's possible. It's also quite possible that someone names their child beloved, right? So I just don't know. But Ishbosheth, I feel more confident about because it means man of shame. And I'm suspecting that Saul did not name his son man of shame. What I think is happening here is that the biblical writers find this. So let's be very clear that the people who are writing this section of history that probably goes from Joshua through the end of 2 Kings, possibly even Deuteronomy through the end of 2 Kings. This seems to all have been written by one group of people, or maybe two. I suspect it's likely that it's originally starts to be compiled during Hezekiah's day and then is finished in Josiah's day and a little bit right after Josiah. But in any case, these are people who are working for the kings of Judah, it would seem. And so those are all descendants of David. They do not like anyone who is a rival to David. That's very, very clear. So here's part of the issue then. It seems to me they're not even going to give this son of Saul who fights with David for the kingdom. They're not even going to give him the dignity of naming him. He does not get a name. Instead, he's just called man of shame. But man of shame, or Ishbosheth, is going to rule over 11 tribes. Benjamin, they're from Benjamin, and Benjamin is the tribe immediately north of Joseph, or of Judah. Now, it's only kind of true. Simeon's been absorbed into Judah, so in some ways, David's reigning over 2, and everyone else, or Ishbosheth, is reigning over 10. Well, kind of 11, because there are really 13 tribes if you count Ephraim and Manasseh as 2, right? So it's never as tidy as we make it sound, but we're just going to go with the typical tidy thing. Just know it's more complicated than that. So David's only over Judah, and these Benjaminites, the sons of Saul and his family, are ruling from Benjamin north. But the contest largely happens between their generals. So they both have uncles that are their generals. I might remember wrong, but I'm pretty sure Abner is Ishbosheth's uncle. He might be his cousin, but in any case, Abner is related to Saul and thus to Saul's son Ishbosheth. It's absolutely, but it's absolutely true that Joab is David's uncle, and so David is going to be both blessed and cursed by Joab. Joab is great for David and terrible for David. He's a very powerful person, both physically and politically and militarily. And sometimes that's good for David, and sometimes David can't fully control Joab, to be honest. He seems to be the one person David can't fully control, besides some of his kids, which is always true for all of us. But anyway, so we get this kind of contest between Abner, who is making it possible for Ishbosheth to reign over so much of Israel. And Joab, who is making it, trying to end that. There's this 7-year war where they're trying to, Joab's trying to take control on David's behalf of the rest of Israel. And they will be the two key players, Abner and Joab. So David is king in Hebron, and Abner it goes to a place called Gibeon. So we've heard of Gibeon before, and we're going to hear about it again later in a podcast still for the reading of this week. Gibeon is the town where the people had tricked Joshua into making a covenant with them, and then the rest of the Canaanites came to attack them, and Joshua did an all-night march to come and save Gibeon, and then the hail came on the Canaanites, and the sun and the moon stood still, and so on. It's just north of Jerusalem, just barely north of Jerusalem. And so they go to Gibeon, and there's a big cistern, or not a cistern, but it's a spring there with this great big hole cut down to get down into the spring. And the hosts of Joab and the hosts of Abner are there for some reason, both of them in the same town, and they decide to have this little contest. And so they had this contest, and everyone in the little contest dies. It's a strange little contest. And as a result, things break apart, and they're all trying to kill each other. So there are 3 sons of Zeruiah there. So Zeruiah is David's grandfather, his maternal grandfather, and the 3 sons are Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. And Asahel is just stinking fast, right? They say he was as light of foot as a wild roe. He's just crazy fast, all right? And so when they all start running and going, it seems like Abner's group is retreating, and Joab's group is chasing after them, but Abner is running to get away. And Asahel starts chasing him, and Asahel's not going right or left. He's not going to do anything else. And Abner looks at him and sees, Asahel, is that you chasing me? And he says, yeah, it's me. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but what Abner says is, Asahel, you don't want this. You don't want a piece of me. I don't want to have to kill you, and you don't want to have to get killed. And I don't want to have to deal with Joab if I kill you. So please quit chasing me. And Asahel says, nope, I'm chasing you. I'm hunting you down. And Abner keeps trying to talk him out of it. And Asahel is catching him. So finally, Asahel's about to catch him. And Abner he must be running with his spear. And he just takes the back part of his spear and just jabs it back. So it's not the sharp end, but it still jabs it back pretty hard. And Asahel is running pretty hard. And it goes under Asahel's 5th rib and comes out the other side in his back. And Asahel dies there. Abner didn't want to do this, but that's what he had to do because Asahel wouldn't give up and was going to try and kill him. And so Asahel dies, and they decide, let's not keep doing this fight all day and just kill off all of Israel so that then we're vulnerable to our enemies. And so Joab, for the moment, stops chasing, and they go back to Hebron. But that's not how this is always going to end. So the battle continues for years, this war, but David is gaining ground slowly. And finally, we get this really interesting thing that happens where Abner sleeps with one of Saul's concubines. All right. And now this is the royal concubines are, so let me explain again. A concubine is a non-free wife. So it's a wife, and we should address plural marriage here briefly. We'll address it a little bit more in the next episode where we talk about Bathsheba. But plural marriage is a standard for royalty all throughout the ancient Near East. God allows it at times, and he makes it clear that for David, that except for one exception, his wives were approved of God. But in any case, the wives are seen as the royal wives, whether free or not. So you have royal wives and royal concubines. Concubine means you're a non-free wife. And they are all seen as taboo. No one can, and this would make sense, no one can have sexual relations with the king's wives without it seeming like they're trying to take over the throne. So no one should be sleeping with Saul's widows, we should say. But Abner does. And Ishbosheth, or the man of shame, or the king who Abner serves, is upset about this, and I understandably so, because it does seem like it's a grab for power. But interestingly, Abner takes great offense that his a younger relative whom he is serving, but really he's the power. He gets after him about this, and over this, he will give up the kingdom over his lusty desires, I guess we could say. And so this is a theme we're seeing a little bit, but his lusty desires will really be the end of Ishbosheth's kingdom. And Abner decides, I'm going to go over to David's side, and without me, you don't make it. And that's exactly what he does. He goes down to Hebron. Joab is off on a march with Joab has become David's kind of head general, commander in chief, whatever you'd like to call him. And he's off on a battle run with a number of people fighting a battle. And Abner shows up, and he and David make a deal. And he says, I'll help you become king of all Israel. And in the end, that's it. As soon as Abner sides with David, the game is over. Ishbosheth cannot stand against a united Joab and Abner and David. There's no way he can do it. Most of the army is going to follow Abner. Anyone who stays is not going to have confidence, because he was their leader. Plus, he knows where their men are. He knows the land. The intelligence he can bring with him just makes it so that this is a done deal. And David will soon become king of all Israel. There's no doubt. So David sends messengers to Ishbosheth, saying, deliver me my wife Michal. He would like Michal back as his wife.